Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. I'm joined once again by my co-host this evening, author, professor, and director of UCLA's Chicano Studies Research Center, Chon Noriega. Welcome, Chon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Now, Chon is joining me every Tuesday and Thursday throughout the month to look at how Latinos have been portrayed in films through the years. And our next film is an adventure tale starring Douglas Fairbanks Sr., playing a hero who leaves his mark with the letter Z. In this case, I'm talking about the original silent version of The Mark of Zorro from 1920. Great story. We've seen it a lot. This time, Douglas Fairbanks Sr. playing a Spaniard, right, in old California. Why did you put this film in this particular series?
It's another really good example of a fascination with the Spanish origins of California. But what's interesting is the way in which it jumps over Mexico. And the film itself gives you the clues right off the bat. It's set almost a century ago, so it's in the 1820s, when essentially Mexico achieved its independence from Spain and set up a constitution, set up a new government. So the story is actually talking about, in some sense, the struggles taking place within the early period of the Mexican nation. However, what we have depicted is a character who is a very effete Spaniard by day and a freedom fighter. Rugged freedom fighter by
swashbuckler
by night. And it's also an example of a film in which this was a turning point in Douglas Fairbanks Sr.'s life. He basically was making a shift from early comic roles to action costume pictures that would turn him into just a major star for the remainder of his career.
So those other films like Thief of Baghdad and The Gaucho, that came later.
Yeah.
So this was the first like that. And a big, big hit.
Absolutely.
So this film, at that time, 1920, what kind of reaction would it get? Would it have anything to do with stereotypes or anything like that about the Spaniards? Or were they all, audiences were rather unsophisticated at this point, right?
I'm not sure about the reaction to this film per se, but it does stand in contrast to other films that are much more explicitly derogatory towards Mexicans. And these are known as the greaser films.
Done at that time.
At that time, by 1920, between 1920 and 1922, they're being put to an end largely because the Mexican government is protesting and telling Hollywood, we're not going to take the films from any studio that even produces one of these films. So that helps bring an end to those stereotypes. This is, in some ways, I think, a safer route to take by looking at a fairly nostalgic and romantic notion of old Spain.
Well, let's look at this film, The Mark of Zorro. Here it is, also with Noah Beery, the brother of the popular character star Wallace Beery. From 1920, directed by Fred Niblo, starring Douglas Fairbanks Sr., The Mark of Zorro. I'm back to talk more about The Mark of Zorro with my co-host, professor, historian, and author of this most informative book called Shot in America, Television, the State, and the Rise of Chicano Cinema, Chon Noriega. And Chon is here to discuss the movies we're showing every Tuesday and Thursday in May as we look at Latino images in film. Now, this wasn't my favorite Douglas Fairbanks movie, but the action scenes are just terrific in that. For 1920?
Yeah, they're quite amazing. The story itself is a little clunky, but when you see these action scenes, they'd hold up well today.
Yeah.
And the first person that comes to mind watching them is Jackie Chan, just in terms of the humorous bravado, the very detailed choreography, and then just his sheer athleticism.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating to me in watching these scenes is the way in which he's anticipating the musical through choreography, and the way in which the fight scenes will set up an audience within the film itself that will be watching him, often like a theater audience. So the film's very contemporary and in some ways anticipating future developments. And it's also an interesting film just in terms of the ethnic and racial masquerade. And I think it's made more palatable in the film by really putting an emphasis on Spanish as a European framework rather than Mexican, which would have been more historically accurate for the film. You know, one of the things that really intrigues me is the way in which the film throughout Zorro's trademark shout is justice for all. And it's so obviously a reference to the Pledge of Allegiance, the end of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, it's mentioned several times in the
and it's
title.
mentioned several times. And you realize it's a very interesting way in which they're trying to tell the history of California by way of Spain, but connect it to a sense of citizenship. And kind of tie those two stories together without having to deal with Mexico. And I think that's a part of the trick of what the film is doing, and other films follow suit.
Right. Well, let's move on. Up next, another silent film, this one from 1927, starring the beautiful Dolores Costello.